My wife and I, when we served in the ministry, we moved more than 36 times because of our job, because we were serving God's people. And it was an honor to do that. It was a privilege. And I started studying the Bible my final year at the University of Miami. I was playing baseball at the time. And I remember breaking my back. I ran into a pole chasing down a fly ball. And not only did it break my back, it completely broke my body and my spirit. I got very serious about my life at that point and started studying the Bible and made a decision to become a Christian. A few years later, I met my wife Dina, who I've been married to close to 25 years now. And we got married, and I had been training for the ministry, and he immediately was asked to go to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and work in the church down there as a minister. We took off to Brazil, and we got there, and it was just millions and millions of people. And even though the people were awesome, the country had its challenges. There was a lot of pollution, there was a lot of crime, tons of illiteracy, lots of problems in the government. The economy was really challenging. But one of the great things that happened to us is that our eldest son, Nico, was born. And when Nico was born, it was really, really exciting, but we noticed right away that he was very, very sick. And when we started to put the pieces together, and my wife got food poisoning about 3 weeks before he was born. And he contracted a strep group A bacteria, the Streptococcus bacteria. And over the years, it wreaked havoc on his brain. And he eventually, after 9 years, he was diagnosed with a condition called PANDAS. And PANDAS is an acronym for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder associated with strep. And it's a real nasty thing, because what happens is the strep bacteria gets into your bloodstream, attaches itself to the basal ganglia, which is the core of your brain. And what that does, it causes seizures, it causes a lot of cognitive problems. It was very difficult for him to figure things out because he was always having these seizures. And so my son, he really, really suffered. He graduated high school in 2009. He wrestled, he was 6 foot and wrestled at 153. And I'm really proud of him because he worked so hard and he never quit, he never gave up. Extremely disciplined and dedicated to the sport and dedicated to his friends. He's become an incredible human being. I'm so proud of him, and he's such a hard worker. Giovanni was also diagnosed with PANDAS. And Gino's symptoms manifest much differently than his brother Nico's. Giovanni had night terrors his whole life. From day one, he had a lot of metabolic issues. He would wake up in the middle of the night and he would be screaming and yelling and running, and he has broken his toes, he's cut his face, his legs, his nose, his lips, his teeth, his fingers. He's been so injured throughout the night. School had become a real problem. Learning is the first place that it manifests itself, where these kids, they just really struggle a whole bunch because of the lack of sleep. We had 2 sleep studies done, one at Duke University and the other at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. It was an estimate and a calculation that Gino's had night terrors over 3,900 times in his life, with an average of 112 disturbances an hour. This is very stressful as a parent. We were up with him all these nights. We're struggling through it. The fatigue, the pain, the confusion, the fear, and that's the biggest thing, is the fear of what's going to be the outcome of all of this. And in the middle of this mess, you're struggling with your faith. You're disappointed with God. You're asking God why. You're really struggling, like David said, "How long, O God? How long? How long?" The incredible thing about Giovanni is that he's very loving, very social, he's very kind, and he's very giving to people. And he can really hit a baseball really, really well, and a golf ball. When I think of Michael, Michael's had a number of physical challenges. Ever since he was a little boy, he had kidney problems, he had kidney disease. And many times he would just curl up and fall down in the fetal position, and he'd be outside playing with his brothers, and his brothers would pick him up and take him into the bathroom as pure red, and it would just scare us to death. And so he's always battled with kidney disease. But then I remember one day in 2009, Michael had developed a lump in his neck. His lymph node was very, very large. And we took him to his pediatrician, and immediately his pediatrician sent him to an ear, nose, and throat surgeon to biopsy the lump. Well, unfortunately, the ENT did not quickly diagnose Michael. 9 months had transpired, and we found out that Michael actually had Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 4 cancer. I'll never forget the day that I got the phone call when we found out our son Michael had cancer. And Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 4, you just become completely numb. I'll never forget the phone call I got from my wife. I was in Colorado working a storm, and I remember my whole body going numb. And I'm so grateful for the doctors that took care of him, and everybody really got involved. Our family, all of the aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents, and everybody got very, very involved. And we appreciated all the support we received from his friends. But when you're going through that, you're thinking, wow, my eldest son had seizures his whole life. My other son, night terrors his whole life and really struggling. And we thought, well, maybe, with Michael, we're going to do okay. And then with the kidney disease, and then finding out he had cancer. I remember when Michael first had his first chemo session, and there's this chemotherapy bag, and we start to see the red fluid come down the tube. And all of a sudden, we're excited because now we're going to attack this cancer. And immediately Michael sat up, and he was completely red, and he grabbed his throat, and then he turned white, and then he turned gray, like blue. And they had to revive him right in front of us. It was the most horrific experience. We almost lost our son that day. And after he went through 6 rounds of chemotherapy, we found out through a PET scan that he had a Chiari brain malformation. So on top of the kidney disease and the cancer and the chemotherapy, he ended up with brain surgery. And I remember the day we were in Denver, and I remember the day that we just got done with the neurosurgeon, telling him that it was a Thursday, and she told us that on that coming up Tuesday that he would have brain surgery. So he had to have the base of his skull removed and decompress the spinal cord so that the fluid could then again fill the spinal column. And I remember standing in the elevator hearing that news right after the appointment with my wife and Michael. And it was a very dark day. It was a very emotionally draining day. And then you get to the point where you feel saturated. Your heart, like how much can a person's heart take as a parent? Not to mention the fact that your kid is struggling. They have their problems and their fears. But as a parent, it's the worst thing. And there's one thing that's worse, of course, and that's your child passing away. And nothing could equate to that level of grief and pain. But when you're going through all these challenges, it's so hard to have faith. So hard to see how this all fits together. It seems like your whole life is falling apart, and you want to see God. You want to hear that faithful ending. You want to hear that good news, but if that day doesn't come, and you're just waiting, and you're searching, and you're looking, and you're going after God like never before. And of course, you have a lot of encouragement from a lot of people and a lot of friends. Michael is doing very well in his recovery from his brain surgery. Actually, the surgery helped him a whole lot. He actually is an AB honor roll student now. Because of his brain surgery, he's able to think more clearly, and so he's really done well. Regarding his cancer, it's been 2 years now, and he's doing phenomenal. His prognosis looks really, really good. He still struggles with the side effects of the chemotherapy, but he's going to work through that, and he's doing great, and we're really proud of him. As Christians, is that we're not entitled to anything. It didn't matter that my wife and I served in the ministry for nearly 20 years. We're foreign missionaries. We gave everything. We dedicated our lives. We gave our children to God. We dedicated everything we had, the best years of our life. We completely expended all our time and energy and efforts for the kingdom of God, for Christianity. And yet you can feel this anger, this bitterness. You know, and some people talk about the journey. Some people say, oh, the joy is in the journey. And personally, I feel like the only joy in the journey is its end. Let's get this over with. Let's move to the next step. Let's go home. Let's get to heaven. There's so many examples in the Bible. Abraham, Moses, Noah. I mean, Abraham waited over 20 years for his son to be born. Noah waited over 100 years for the flood and building the ark. Think about Moses. He wandered for 40 years in the desert. It's hard to imagine that these guys spent that kind of time wandering and struggling, and God was working in their lives. I think about David. David was anointed king by the prophet Samuel. Of course, my favorite story is Joseph of the Old Testament, where from the point that he had his dream to the time of the fulfillment was 27 years. And that huge gap, that valley, that desert, that's our journey. That's the struggle. That's where the pain is. And so often we can become divinely disappointed because we want to fast forward to the end so quickly so that we know when we're going through trials, there's some kind of payoff. And the reality is that things take time. And anytime I feel like I want to complain to God or curse God or thrash out at God, I always come back to the cross of Jesus Christ. The cross to me is the equalizer. There's no real argument that I can have with God and win to say, look at my life, look what I've done, look what I've given, and now look at my children suffering. It's not right, it's not fair. And I heard someone once say, you don't want fair. Fair is bad, fair is tough. That's why we need God's grace. I appreciate so much the songs and the lyrics and the recordings of Kurt Collins. Leave it up to you. Leaving it up to God is probably the only thing that I can do to survive mentally, psychologically, emotionally. You have to leave it up to God. When life doesn't make sense, when everything seems broken. And that's the only way that I can cope with life today. And I hope that you would come out and hear me speak about leaving it up to God.
I just wanted to share with you, I think Mike's story, his life story is just incredible. When I met Mike, he started telling me about all these things that his family had been through. And my goodness, for someone to have the kind of faith that he has and to always point towards the cross, just an amazing thing.